Hey everyone, I'm joined here today with Dr. Sunil Pai. He wrote the book Information Nation. It's awesome. I just started to read it. I got my autographed copy the other week. Oh, thank you for showing it. I wished I had my copy. But
Yeah, it's hard with the
yeah,
glare here, but yeah.
yeah, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. He also sells the very popular Bosmeric SR, so turmeric Boswellia supplement. We'll talk a little bit about that after, but I've been taking that as well. We're also joined here today with Dr. Suzanne Fox.
Hi, everyone.
She's going to be my co-host going forward as we venture into our plant-based coaches initiative, and happy to have you on board.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, and Dr. Pai has been doing podcasts with Chef AJ, and I've been learning a lot, so much about spices. And I
Good.
think you have 1 month left, right? Of
1 or 2 months left,
spices.
and then we're going to go into some cooking demonstrations and making spice blends and, really moving, one of my, I would say not pet peeves, but one of my pet peeves is in the plant-based movement here in the United States is that a lot of people were eating, animal-centric standard American diet with very little culinary experience or skill, right? Because we go out, just grill a steak, throw a potato, maybe boil some vegetables, put it on. That was a plate. And so when they took away the animal protein and they were just sticking with the sides, to me, the Western plant-based diet was very bland and boring. And it was very hard to, since I see patients from all around the world, all around the country as well, is that, we're missing the flavors, we're missing the spices. And since most people don't know how to cook, it was just like, okay, here's a 3 bean salad, here's kale and quinoa. But really, most people around the world don't just eat that way. They're having tacos or spaghetti or enchiladas or stir fry and all. And like since we didn't have the most of the culture doesn't have the culinary experience, that's why they go out to eat because it's easy to have the convenience. My goal is to bring back the flavor to the foods and making the food as medicine because most of the spices, as you've been watching on the show, and that's written in the other books that I quote on the show, those are the actual medicinal plant compounds that are really, really powerful. And that's why they're used all around the world. But we kind of strip them out of our American diet. So my goal is to hopefully help people bring them back so that food is medicine. That's what we want.
And I've
That
tried
makes sense.
so many of them. I found a lot of new spices I like. Like coriander is one,
Yeah.
nutmeg,
Yeah. We've been
cloveria.
covering, we'll cover 50 in the show. And then when I start up our podcast, Take Back Your Health, we're going to kind of do a deeper dive into each of those. So we'll have like little highlights and little recipes and things that people easily can do. Like, it's cost effective. And really, if you focus on adding more of the spices and herbs into your food, not only is it flavorful, but you have a higher impact on your health.
But one question I have is, I know you talked about this on Chef AJ about making sure you buy fresh spices and try to avoid spices that have been sitting on the shelf for years, and some spices never move. And
Correct. I
also,
mean, a lot of times, a lot of people like just take cinnamon, right? Because that's a kind of a common
yeah,
spice that most people will know. So it's not something that they have to learn about. That most people know about cinnamon, right? They put it in their desserts and they put it in coffee and they put it in, especially over the holiday season, cinnamon. So they go to the big box stores and they buy like this big, it's like a pound bottle and it just says cinnamon on there. What they don't realize is that there's different grades of cinnamon, different countries of origin of where cinnamon is. There's different types of cinnamon. There's like a sweeter cinnamon, there's a spicier cinnamon, and what are the different compounds in there. So a lot of people use cinnamon just for cooking, but when you look at it around the world, we're using it as a medicine in the food. So it's making the food flavorful. But the key is just like your medicines, everything has an expiration. These are plant compounds. And so we like to have people always purchase and buy smaller amounts of spices. We have recently started with one company which we like, and there's a variety of companies I use, but one is called Diaspora, and it's because they use like small, cooperative farms in India, in other countries. It's organic, and they put them. I didn't bring it, but they come in like little tins. They're small, so they're not like you're getting this big amount. There's usually single origin, and so we're really looking at trying to support
yep,
farming that's
yep.
organic or regenerative and biodynamic and fair trade and all these things because people don't realize that whole spices, there's also a spice trade that goes along with big conglomerates just buying stuff and selling it and not knowing that there's labor behind that or maybe sometimes illegal practices as well. We just get at the store and put it on our food.
Right.
But really to retain those compounds in terms of the bioactive uh, phytonutrients of those compounds, fresher is always better. And how you seal it and how you keep it, And so these are, putting it in a tin or putting it in a glass is very, very important, and buying it smaller. So you're just replenishing it. But most people, like when they get married or they have, they buy a new house, like they always get this like spice set as a gift,
Yeah.
and when we do consultations with our patients, and we sometimes go to their homes and we do some cooking demonstrations in their home, because we do that. We open up, and like those things haven't been used in like 10, 15 years. I'm like,
Yep.
that's all out. You gotta take it out.
Yeah.
It's not gonna. It may have a smell, for example, might have a little bit of a taste, but we're talking about like the anti-inflammatory effects, anti-cancer benefits, anti-cholesterol, anti-blood sugar, the memory-enhancing benefits. It's not there because just like anything else, it'll expire.
Right. And the
Wow.
reason I brought it up is this will lead into our inflammation conversation as well. My dad, he was diagnosed last year with giant cell arteritis, and he's one who bought turmeric. I think it was from CVS, and it was not organic or anything. And he says, I was wrong. Turmeric doesn't work.
Right.
And, when you buy spices like that, you don't even know if you're getting turmeric, for
Yeah, I
example.
mean, right now, 43%, the last study shows that 43% of generic turmeric extract and curcumin extract on the internet, even on the biggest retailer right now, is synthetically made. Right.
Wow.
Okay. And then a majority of that will have lead contamination. And that just comes from the grinders that are being used in China and India for grinding the rhizome, the skin off the root. And so these are things that when you look at a product, you say, here's Bosmeric, okay, it's this price. And then people go, I can go on the internet, I can go to, the big retailer online, Amazon or Walmart or just whatever shop online, and I can see something that's like $5 or $6 or $10. It sounds very similar. It's like, no, the potency, the purity, the safety, the efficacy is not there. And that's where most of these products will fail. And that's why
Wow.
most doctors are anti-supplement, understandably, because most of the products out there don't work. But the
Right.
reason being is because the industry is about selling, not about potency, purity, safety, efficacy. And that's been our mantra ever since we started 24 years ago. And so my specialty in formulation of the product is one thing, but also my specialty is actually then finding from source, meaning from the farm all the way to the table, how that works, who makes it, who does the patenting of it, how is it processed. There's a whole science behind that. But the internet and social media is just about, here's a category, but what you actually get may be completely different.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
So, for example, when you hear, I heard someone the other day, they're like, "Oh, I saw your product, but I went in and they bought something like under $10." I said, "Well, some of the same similar ingredients that took it and they got diarrhea." I'm like, you should never get diarrhea from it unless you're allergic to it. Number one, which some people can be allergic to any of the ingredients, like
right.
turmeric or ginger or something like that, or black pepper. But what it really was is that it's a synthetic molecule, right? And so they have solvents, they have other chemicals, and the data shows that they're being harmful. And so there's even ones that have like certain oils, that are like called turmeric oils. And the data has been shown, even now we have 10 years of data, that actually is more pro-inflammatory and causes damage. But since essential oils were very popular on this side of the market, people were
Interesting.
kind of
Yeah.
linking and saying, well, this has this thing, this product is just a lesser of a product. Higher margin, more safety problems, but people like it because that's the trend.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. This is what I deal with every day. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I mean, it's in my house too. I have a giant spice rack of probably stuff that's been there 5 or 10 years. I probably need to throw it all out because it
Well,
probably is.
ever since watching his show on Chef AJ, I threw half of mine out.
which is good. And what you really want to do is start with the ones that you use commonly, right? And then kind of build it rather than buying because you see, like, you can buy these sets.
Yeah.
Like, you may not even use some of those, so then that's just wasting your money and wasting space. Start with a few, then and that's why, like, eventually when we do the spice blends, that will also make it easier so that people can kind of put it together, and then they say, hey, I want to have a Caribbean spice meal or Indian or a Thai spice. Then instead of if they're not so much culinary skill, or they don't have much time to cook, instead of putting those 5 or 6 things together, it's going to be like, here, just put this on. And that makes, again, it's always about making life easier for Americans. And I understand that more than anybody. So if we can move them forward, but it's always going to be, an experience where they have to be a little bit proactive. And yeah, definitely just try starting off with a few and then adding more. And that's where, like, when we introduce one ingredient at a time, I always tell people, like, go home, make 1 recipe or 2 recipes, play around with it. If you like it, then put it in your pantry.
So my first question, by the way, Suzanne, I think we probably should alternate asking the questions because Suzanne wrote half of them. So
Sure.
I don't know if you want to ask your half after or.
I would just do every other one.
Yeah, we'll do every other one.
That'll
Okay.
work.
Yeah, so the first question I have is in relation to inflammation. What is it in animal products that specifically leads to inflammation?
Okay, that's a great question. That's probably the first question that we get for almost everybody. My book goes into detail on some of it, but I'm going to show you a slide, which I always say, like, this is my main slide. If everybody just understands the slide, you don't have to have any more discussion about plant-based versus non-plant-based. You can just drop the mic and leave. I can literally just put it up in a conference and just leave because it has everything that you need to know. But I want to talk about the end of the slide. There's some new information that came out just recently, which is going to blow people's minds about nanoplastics. Okay, so
Yeah.
let me share my screen and let's get started here. So when we look at, see if you can see this. I have two different things up here. All right, let me make this a little bit smaller here. So the differences between animal proteins and saturated fats, right? Saturated fats come from animal proteins, right? So like the grease, the fat, bacon fat, beef fat, pork fat, those kind of things like that, and plant proteins. So when we look at plant proteins are anti-inflammatory in general, okay, except when we talk about inflammatory responses that can be like a sensitivity, like a food sensitivity, which is one thing that we look at in all our patients. But the inflammation comes because when we feed people animal protein, it increases these three, at least in the studies that we have simply, is CRP, which is a mark of inflammation, IL-6, and TNF alpha. TNF alpha is one of the major pathways of a cascade of hundreds of inflammatory markers in the individual, and drug companies have made what we call TNF alpha blockers. Like we're trying to give these immunotherapies and certain targeted therapies for patients with autoimmune disease to help block this cascade of inflammation. So I just was funny. I was looking up when I was thinking about this question the other day, I was just looking up some research. And then there's this article that came out saying, well, they did this kind of methodological analysis, and they showed that there was no difference in eating processed meat, which would be like pepperoni and those kind of things, which we know are carcinogenic now, right? By the World Health Organization, class 1 carcinogens like asbestos and stuff like that. That's what it does, especially the processed meats, the cured meats, and regular, just fresh meats. And they said that there was no change in inflammation. But the problem is that when you're eating both inflammatory foods, there's not going to be a change because it's still both pro-inflammatory. So you're comparing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. And so when I went to the bottom, there's a whole list of these, the authors of the paper, and I looked at the first author, second author, third author. All of them are sponsored by the USDA, which is like, which is the animal protein industry lobby group. But when we actually look at randomized, double-blinded control studies or randomized crossover studies where they feed the person, the group of people, here's your standard American animal protein diet, and here's a plant-based diet, and even they have some sub-studies where they actually just replace a few meals per week. So it's not a complete, just like, hey, what if we just added a little bit of tofu or a little bit more kale or a little bit more quinoa or a little bit more, vegetables or sweet potatoes. And so they're not completely. So there was like complete studies, crossover, and there's partial studies. But in the complete and partial, all of these inflammatory markers go down when they're eating more plant-based. Right. So when we actually compare like a real study, not just some kind of like broad thing where the industry wants to say, well, you don't have any differences. When you say, here's the people eating this, let's measure them, cross them over. Here's the people eating that, let's measure them, what's happening. It lowers those inflammatory marks. But there's other things. So other things are like omega-6s. So animal proteins increase what we call omega-6. Now, also, what we have to also be fair about is plant-based eaters or vegans, particularly the younger generation, and even the older generation right now, there's a lot of junk foods, a lot of fried foods. So vegetable oils can also be a high omega-6. So we have to be careful of fried foods as well. But in general, animal proteins like milk, dairy, eggs, fish, and all the stuff like that have high also omega-6s. And plant proteins are high in omega-3, flax, chia, hemp, walnuts. And so we're trying to give this, anti-inflammatory diet by giving more omega-3s. That's why there's a whole industry that was pushing omega-3 supplementation, right? What we do with our patients, actually, we can actually measure these things. We can actually measure your omega-3s, 6, 7s, and 9s. And more importantly, do you have the delta-6 desaturase enzyme that makes you convert it? Yesterday, I had a patient that their enzyme is completely functional, meaning it works. So I'm just like, okay, if you just eat more flax, chia, hemp, or walnuts, you get your EPA for your heart health, your anti-inflammatory fatty acid, and your DHA, which is your brain health, naturally from foods, plus the fiber and the protein from the seeds and nuts. But I also had a person just earlier this week, their enzyme was impaired. So they can eat those foods, which I want them to do to get the fiber and the protein, but they don't convert their EPA and DHA. So then we still have to then supplement them with a plant omega-3 just to get additional. So there's ways that we can actually measure that. But in general, omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. Now, since animal proteins are they have very little antioxidants, 99% of animal protein now in America is factory farm. Okay. So since animals are not eating their vegan diet, right? They're grass and all stuff like that. They're very low antioxidants. And that's why most people are like, I got to take multivitamins. I got to take all these supplements and stuff like that. And there's no phytonutrients. And what phytonutrients are, I just want to show you this right here, just real quick. Phytonutrients are all these kind of phytochemicals, all the bright color compounds that we now put in pills, unfortunately, but that's what we have to do because we haven't been eating these things. So when you think of lycopene and beta carotenes and flavonoids and folic acid and indoles and anthocyanins and resveratrol and all these other things, they all come from the color compounds. And so we want people to eat more of this, what we always talk about the rainbow, because each color has a compound that has anti-everything benefits, as I say, okay? And so the problem is animal protein has no phytonutrients, right? That's why it's just kind of a dark-colored, fleshy piece of food, protein, but it's not colorful. And that's why even in magazines, I was at the store the other day, at the checkout aisle, and I saw there's two magazines right next to each other. One's like this plant-based healthy living one, and so it has all these colors. And the other one was like a paleo cookbook, and it had a piece of steak which was kind of just dark and brown and just kind of dull looking, not really attractive. But what made the photo attractive is all around it. They're putting tomatoes, red peppers, and sweet potato pieces, and all these colors because our eyes have been drawn to look for color. In the environment, we look for color. That's how we would forage and look for food. So there's no phytonutrients. And an interesting thing is antioxidants and phytonutrients indirectly are anti-inflammatory components. They're antioxidants primarily, but they're also indirectly anti-inflammatory. So when we do our testing, we can actually show the what they call the citric acid cycle. We can see like your electron transport chain. We can see how these antioxidants, phytonutrients are either producing more anti-inflammatory effects in the patient, or if they're deficient in them, how they're more pro-inflammatory. Because some people can still be in a pro-inflammatory state eating animal protein, but just not eat a lot of animal protein, right? So some people may not be eating like, the full rack of ribs. They're just having, a full.
We lost Dr. Pai. We lost you for a second there.
Oh no.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's good.
Okay. So with the antioxidants and phytonutrients, they also have this anti-inflammatory effect indirectly, okay, and directly. We know that it's lowering inflammation and oxidative stress, and we can measure that in our patients. Okay, so we can measure the citric acid cycle. I don't know if you heard that before, but we can actually measure like how your electron transport chain is making energy, and also is it pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory based on antioxidant intake and phytonutrient intake. And the other thing that's really important about understanding these are the benefits. So like high omega-3s, no cholesterol. Number one cause of death still in America, that's not a lifestyle, but that is a lifestyle, that's not a drug, is heart disease, right? 3 people every minute have a heart attack in the United States. So cholesterol, as we know, is a big issue. That's why Lipitor is the number 1 prescribed drug in the world right now. And still we have the same rate of heart attacks and strokes because we're not reducing the laying down of the plaque with the drugs. We're just reducing the blood levels on the test. Okay. So that's why when we go plant-based, we can actually reverse people's heart disease. So, no cholesterol, high phytonutrients, again, the color high antioxidants. But more recently in the last 5 years is where we're learning more and more about what we call the microbiome. And that's one area that we've been studying for about 15 years. But the last 5 years, the data is immense and explosive. Every day, there's just hundreds of articles being published because we have this technology now that we can actually understand and learn about the microbiome. But there's no fiber in animal protein. Right. And what happens is without the fiber is what feeds your microbiome. You have 100 trillion of over 1,000 species of weighing 4 pounds in your gut, your 35-foot long tract of your gut of microbes. Okay. And they feed only off of plant foods. They eat the short chain fatty acids from plant foods that creates their own energy. It's called butyrate. Okay, and that fiber creates microbiome diversity. But the most recent studies are showing is that when we eat animal protein, we get what they call dysbiosis. It creates an imbalance because the healthy bacteria cannot consume and eat the animal protein. And so what it does, it creates these aspects of what they call pro-inflammatory metabolites. And over time, very quickly, within 2 weeks, it starts shifting the friendly bacteria that we would have into what we call unfriendly bad bacteria, meaning opportunistic bacteria, because they're trying to break down the substance, which they can't. It switches their species, and then it becomes more pro-inflammatory. So the more animal protein that we have, more constipation we get, the more colon polyps we get, the higher rate of colon cancer, for example. More importantly, there's also what they call endotoxins. Endotoxins are the toxins that were found in meat. Now, we used to think like, okay, well, maybe because people are not cooking it well, and some people eat like rare food and stuff like that. But what they found out is that the endotoxins, which are the bacteria in the meat, even if it's organic and grass-fed and wild-caught and free-range, it's in the meat. And when they cook it, they boil it, they fry it, and even the stomach acid, it still exists. And then it causes this disruption. It increases what they call LPS. It's a pro-inflammatory trigger, lipopolysaccharides in the body, and that's what starts degrading the lining of the GI tract. So that's why over time people have colitis, inflammation of the colon, gastritis, inflammation of the stomach, for example, and eventually leads to Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and then eventually some of those patients, 40% of those patients, up to 50% of those patients in 10 years will end up having a colon cancer due to that chronic inflammation in their gut. Cancer is another thing. So these are different things that occur from cancer, but they're also pro-inflammatory because we now understand that cancer is the disruption of certain aggravators in the cell that eventually will turn the cell to change, right? So it becomes like a normal cell to an abnormal cell. Eventually, it turns into a dysplasia to a metaplasia to a cancer cell. And these are the markers that actually come from animal protein. So TMAO, particularly we now understand from eggs, which is very interesting. IGF, which is the strongest growth factor that comes from dairy, okay? And then HCA is like when we grill the meat, that char, that heating the food to that high temperature, which is what people usually do. Have these, go to the steakhouses, they cook it at 600 degrees. If you went to Vegas and you went to get a real expensive steak, that char, that burning of it actually creates this carcinogenic compound. Now you can grill all your vegetables, you can heat it, it doesn't cause any of it. It just makes more warm vegetables. So the cool thing is like those people who want to barbecue, you can barbecue your tempeh, your tofu, your seitan, your vegetables, and all that stuff on the grill, and put all your sauces on it. You don't have those chemical compounds. And then, again, it triggers inflammation, which actually increases intracellular lipids. That means you get more fat in the tissue and you get more insulin resistance. So those people who eat more animal protein diets, they have higher rates of insulin resistance and diabetes and blood sugar problems. And that's how we reverse it, again, by eating more animal anti-inflammatory proteins. But what I really want to get to, this is really interesting, that was just more recent in the data, just came out this week, is aside of the bioaccumulation of heavy metals and pesticides, and we know that when the animal's eating this, it concentrates in its flesh, right? And then we eat that, right? So then we are just getting what they call the bioaccumulation. And in my book, we cover like bioaccumulation of foods because, for example, like in the ocean, right? If people were to eat any kind of fish, the smallest fish, like an anchovy, would be the safest. Not that we're recommending it, but was the safest. Why? In terms of heavy metals, because it's the smallest amount in terms of body mass. But then those mercury, heavy metals, PCBs, and dioxins, it will then bioaccumulate. So then when a larger fish would eat that, then that concentrates. And so when people would eat tuna, for example, particularly, not the small tuna, the big tuna. So when people go, oh, I want to get ahi tuna, for their sushi, which is like the best sushi, for example, that would have the highest amount of heavy metals because it's concentrating as that fish is eating the smaller fish, Or those people who eat shark steaks, which would be the larger animal eating the smaller fish, it's bioaccumulation. But more recently, what they showed is they looked at patients that had to have endarterectomies. Okay, I mean, that's when we have a little bit of symptoms of stroke or transient ischemic attacks, TIAs. They do an ultrasound of your neck and they say, oh my God, the cholesterol is just like how we do like a angiogram of the heart and we're going to like put a stent or a bypass of the heart. They do it of the neck because, right, what happens is if these vessels here are clogged, then we have a risk of less blood or a clot coming in to the brain. So they actually took an electron microscope and they were looking at the plaque, and they found that 60% of the people in the study had the highest amount of what they call nano and microplastics in
Ooh.
the cholesterol plaques.
Wow.
And when they looked at it in an electron microscope, it creates these jagged, sharp edges that eventually will tear and cause the clot and the stroke. And those people that had this found in the scan, they actually had a 4.5 time higher risk of having a stroke or a heart attack or die in
Wow.
3 years.
3 years.
Wow.
Right now, why are these people having so much microplastic? Because there was another study that just came out a month earlier, which is very interesting because this has answered some of our question, is they were looking at all foods, right? Because the microplastics now are in everything, right? Like, because we put everything in the ocean, everything we wash in our clothes goes to the ocean. Everybody's drinking bottled water, for example, all that plastics in the bottle. Like, there was a study showing like how many hundreds of thousands of microplastics per bottled water that we drink we're consuming. So it looks clear, but there's like, I think it was like 100 or 200,000 parts of microplastic in a bottle of water. It's crazy. So how many people are walking around like, I'm drinking my bottle of water, Dr. Pai, I'm exercising, I'm doing my yoga, da 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 da, and not knowing that they're just swallowing microplastics. But when they looked at foods, because remember, we water foods, right? Like you're growing your soybeans, your tofu, and also you're growing your chicken, your fish, and your beef, and all these other things as well. The animal protein, again, has the highest amount of microplastics and nanoplastics in it. Why? Because those animals are consuming more volume of the water over their lifespan, and then we're eating it, and then we're bioaccumulating again from them. But what we now know that is actually causing, so on top of just the cholesterol and the inflammation, which is a double whammy, now it's a trifecta. Now we're understanding that there's microplastics, and there's nothing to take out microplastics. One of my predictions is that when we will analyze this going forward, we see a lot of patients in America right now, even patients who are plant-based, okay, where their cholesterol might be normal, everything is normal, but their GFR, their glomerular filtration rate, which is how their little kidney tubules are working, is low. Like they have what they call CKD, chronic kidney disease. Why so many people in America have chronic kidney disease? We have a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 code for it. But all these people are just like, over time, we see their GFR going down. Even though they're hydrating well, it's going down. And the answer from me, which I'm predicting now, and I'll be explored, and then probably it'll be agreed upon, is that there's microplastics probably getting stuck in the kidney tubules, just as much as it's getting stuck in the plastic. Right? The kidney tubules are more sensitive, right? They're filtering the water. So these people are super hydrated, which is great. We want to be drinking water, but we want to be drinking it out of glass. We want to be making sure that we're filtering it completely, not only from all the other heavy metals and different chemicals that we get, but also we have to be careful of microplastics. So that's another new thing, because now we understand that the microplastics are triggering a low-grade inflammatory response, in addition to the inflammation that they're already getting from all of this, what I mentioned before. So this is another thing. Now, I'm sure the drug company is going to find some kind of plastic Drano product, whatever, for us to take. But really, what we need to start doing is we need to, as a public, need to start pushing and talking to members of Congress and our representatives of how do we stop plastic industry waste. Right. The goal is like we need to stop getting rid of these single use bottles. You go to the store. I remember as a kid growing up, even when when you went down the aisle of the store, even if it was soda, it was glass bottles. Right. We used to return, used to get 5 cents. Used to go, I was a kid, I was to collect the bottles, to return it, to get a little cash, right? And then we switched to plastic, right? So all these things that we thought was convenient, it's actually an inconvenience for us later on. And so, like, if you have microplastics, if you take a statin, it doesn't remove that. Right. Wow. So then there's another failure. It's like, oh, well, your lipids look good, but you're still building plaque. And, here we go. We still have a heart attack and stroke. So plant-based proteins are just the opposite. They lower the blood sugar. They lower the cholesterol. They feed the microbiome. They lower inflammation. And they have the lowest amount of nanoplastics. They're not without it, because we're still watering the plants. But when they actually measured the amounts per pound or per unit of food, the plant protein has the lowest.
Wow. You never think about microplastics like that, but wow, is this
so some of the things with microplastics we're looking at is plastics also are carcinogenic. Okay, and so there's polyvinyl chloride, which they find in most of this plaque now, and polyethylene, other plasticizers, and they also contain what they call xenoestrogens, which is the estrogenic aspect that we get from plastic. So when we look at the rise of estrogen positive breast cancer, for example, in women, all ages now, like 1 and 2, like they're predicting, right? That's the thing. 1 and 2 women will have breast cancer in their lifetime. Like, how is this possible? Why is this possible? Two aspects. The data came out 2 years ago. This was an oncologist speaking at the International Conference of Nutrition and Medicine in Washington, D.C. And they just, so it's evidence, data driven, university backed, and all this stuff. So it's not just a health conference. This is like, you get your CME, you go, you're learning about data. And they showed that having 3 servings of dairy and 2 pats of butter is equivalent to 40% estrogen and 60% progesterone of a birth control pill. So let me
Wow.
say that again. 3 servings of dairy, 2 pats of butter, 40% estrogen, 60% progesterone of a birth control pill. Now, women who get estrogen positive breast cancer, it's contraindicated for them to take hormones. So they give them a hormone blocker, tamoxifen and astrazole, all these hormone blockers, right? And then it's like, well, after 5 years, it didn't really work very well. So they say, take it for 10 years. And now at 10 years, they're like, well, we got to continue taking it. Why? Because it's not doing very well. It's not that the drug is failing. Is that it would be contraindicated for us to write a hormone for blocking someone we need to block the hormone, but we're not talking about the food that actually has that hormone in there. So that's the dairy. But now we're talking about the plastics. So women are getting bombarded, and men, by the way, right?
Yeah.
So these are things that we have to look at from an environmental perspective. It's not that the drugs are failing sometimes, it's that what we're failing to is protect the public from environmental hazards. And that's including food, which is now becoming an environmental hazard.
Yes, it's terrible. Incredible.
It is.
The plastic bottles, really, it's bad.
It's bad. I mean, we all think about, we think about the waste in the landfills and all these other things, but we're not looking at it like, well, that all breaks down in the big ocean, and that becomes and then all these animals are eating it. So people are like, I'm having my shrimp, my lobster, and all the bottom feeders that hyper concentrate that, or the fish and all, and then this is it's a worldwide problem because you can't avoid water, right? Because some of it's got to go to the sky and then rain down. So when they look at the microplastics in the last study that they just, this is all bringing this out. So this is all a big news thing, right? They're finding microplastics already in cord blood of newborn babies. Just as we find forever chemicals in newborn babies, right? Forever is the Teflon stuff that we use in pans and waterproofing. And so there's so much of the stuff that we use, understandably why we use it, because it's convenient. It's nice to have a waterproof thing or a pan that doesn't stick, but not knowing that every time it goes down the drain, how it's coming back. And so like there's a high rate of us getting, toxicity. And so when we measure in our patients toxic levels, and when we measure detoxification markers, aside of the fiber that we want to increase to help bind these toxins, we can actually help augment their detoxification pathways through natural therapies, through foods, so that we can understand, like, we may not be able to live in a bubble, but we can help our body help eliminate these things. And when we measure it, if they're elevated, that means that the patient is higher risk of having pro-inflammatory triggers from, say, arsenic or mercury or lead or cadmium or uranium. We have this in our standard water that you just get from the tap. And so for each of our patients, we look up their zip code, we look up the environmental working group report, boom, here's your risk. Is your filter that you have at home clearing that? And we can actually see if their filter is or not.
Wow, that's very
cool.
This
is the importance, right? Because a lot of people who come to my practice, we will help them transition over time. Now those people who are more cancer and autoimmune or flaring, they change quickly because it's a dire need to do that, right? Because they have a health risk. But those other people that are, have obesity, have diabetes, have high blood pressure, etc., then it's a slow transition, and that because we want them to feel comfortable, because we want them to be compliant, because it's a lifestyle change, right? It's not a trend. So we start with these things, but we have to look at also these environmental aspects that if we find these other things and we make the patient better, then going forward, not just eating the diet, you have to make sure that you're making an anti-inflammatory lifestyle together.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Alone don't work sometimes. That's a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, Suzanne, you can take the next question.
I wanted to ask you, Dr. Pai, about the challenges that you face from other physicians. Are they how do they feel about your practice and how you do things? Are you do you find that challenging to work with them or around them? Is that
so most of our we do telehealth with our patients, and then we do in-person. So most people who are local, they come in, but about 70% of my practice is not in my state, right? Because they're looking for a formally fellowship trained integrative physician doing it for 25 years. So I'm kind of like, I'm in one of the OG groups of integrative, formally trained, not just taking a weekend course or just hanging the shingle, which most people do. Like, I'm holistic, I'm integrative and all, and going further, like learning like acupuncture, Ayurvedic medicine, looking at plant-based medicines, indigenous medicines, and yoga, mindfulness, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can read my bio where you have all that experience. But I don't really find a backlash in a way. And the reason being is because when you're evidence-based, you don't have to worry about anything. Like, everything that we do has a double-blinded randomized controlled clinical trial, or has, in vivo and vitro studies on showing benefits and less risk. The key is when we apply that same evidence, a level of evidence, to conventional medicine, a lot of times it falls very short.
Yeah.
Right. So, when I first started 24 years ago, there was a little bit of a backlash because there was a little bit of like, this is new. What is that thing that you're doing? And what's integrative? And what does that mean by combining and being evident? What is evidence-based? But now, since evidence-based is all what everybody wants to practice now, they're a little bit shy to say stuff because, it's like, okay, here's a drug that you're prescribing. Let's look at the data on that. Let's look at that issue itself. And, then they're very quiet. Interesting thing in the last 5-6 years is that we've been getting a lot of physicians who come and ask, how do I do what you're doing now?
Wow. Now
Okay.
that's
good.
And that's different. That's a shift. And the reason being is because people are leaving their doctors in groves, right? People are, and this is very interesting. And I'm going to be open and honest here. Most people who are plant-based, I would say, are a little bit on the progressive side, a little bit on the, maybe on the blue side of politics. But I have my share. Like 40% of my practice can be just as ultra-conservative red state thinking, okay? But what everybody shares is everybody's sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're tired of taking a pill that doesn't make them feel perfect, that has a side effect, and they're never getting better. And now I'm just taking another pill for that side effect, or I have a procedure and now I have to recover for that. So there's it's funny because there's all this politics all the time that's splitting people. But what really, everybody shares the same thing. Everybody wants better healthcare. Everybody wants to feel better. But and they make it a political issue, or they make it a pharmaceutical insurance issue, or whatever. But really, what people are lacking is that they're lacking the right to feel good, right? Most people have not felt the best in decades, right? And so it's very interesting when they come to see me, because it's like I'm open. I'm like our whole goal is not saying this is better than that. It's like, how do we improve our patients' outcomes? And so it's outcome driven. I don't, it doesn't matter how we get there, as long as it's safe, effective, natural, less invasive. I don't own it. It's the patient owning themselves in their healing process. And I'm the guide and the teacher and the expert to help guide them there. But for each patient, it might be a different angle that gets them there. And that's okay. As long as the risk is reduced, that's the end goal. Yeah. I'm a risk reductionist, not a perfectionist. And a lot of people sometimes in the plant-based world become perfectionists. They become so restrictive that the patients end up losing, and then they drop out due to compliance issues. We're always looking at how do we improve that function by finding, that subtle nuance. There's an art and science to medicine that we practice. And that's like, how do we find a middle ground? How do we find that, bringing them more towards the center? So it's not like you have to do this radical thing. It's like, how do we make cooking easier? How do we even use substitutes? I'm okay with using substitutes. There's good ones and bad ones, but it's making it easier because most people don't know how to cook. So we do cooking classes. We do things like we help, like moving them in the right direction is key. But a lot of people are like, don't do this, do this, and they just shut off, right? That's the American thing. We're hard to change.
Right. Hard, yep.
Yep.
So I don't find the backlash. Now I'm always open to talk to other doctors. And it's funny because even like, the latest oncology, like I had a couple of patients with oncologists recently and they're all reaching out like, well, what do you do? Why is this patient, it used to be this kind of like, well, continue doing whatever you're doing with Dr. Pai. And they weren't interested because like, they don't want to know, because when they know, that means they have to learn.
Yeah.
Right. And then some of that learning is hard because in the environment that they practice, you're not allowed to talk about other things, right? Like they can't tell you to eat better because that's not medicine. FDA has given a definition that the only thing that can prevent, reverse, and treat a disease is a drug. And therefore, everything else outside of that can't do that. Not just talking about supplements. I'm talking about exercise, diet, mindfulness, faith. None of that is, by definition from the government, can help prevent, reverse, or treat disease. So then they have to practice that when you're in a kind of a conservative institution. It's like, well, here's a drug and eat whatever you want, do whatever you want, and just show up for your treatment. And we always improve that outcome.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
definitely. definitely.
Definitely very effective. I like the part where you said that you have to meet the patient where they're at and kind of just work with that, because you will lose them. I have that
Yeah.
frequently in my practice. It's you lose them if you can't, if you can't meet them where they're at. It's
Yeah,
hard.
I had a patient just about 2 months ago, and I've been seeing him for, I think it's like 14 or 15 years. And now he's completely changed, right? So it
Yeah.
took, and I've been to every visit, still saying the same thing, and it just took him that long to have this aha moment. And he's been getting better over time, but like now he's like, he completely gets it, right? Now, some people can just do that overnight. Some people take several months, but to me, it's like, as long as they get there and as long as the risk is reducing, it's not about perfection. Because
Yeah.
the goal with
I
disease,
agree. Yeah.
how we look at integrate from an integrated perspective, and this is where medicine and alternative medicine will fail, in my opinion, is because they're looking at everything as a targeted approach only. Like, here's a smoking gun and here's the magic bullet,
Okay.
right? And what disease is, and what even cancer is a multifactorial thing. It's epigenetics. It's diet, lifestyle, environment, belief system. It's like the stereo. You have all these different treble and bass and mid range, and you want to move those things so it's balanced. And medicine, and also on the alternative side, they're like, just do this, turn it all the way up. Just do this. It's like, if I only exercise more, if I only just meditated more, if I only just juiced more, if I only just took my drugs on time. It's more complicated than that, and it's also very easy. Because once you go through the epigenetics of the patient, which is what we do, and we specialize that diet, lifestyle, environment, belief system, then you're just turning down and balancing all these factors. It doesn't have to be perfect, because as long as you reduce the risk, that's as good as you want to get. You can go further if you want, and we help people. Some people want to be completely, perfect on everything, and that's fine. But most people's like, if I can get them out of the hospital, if I can prevent them from having a heart attack, if I can reduce their medications or take them off, even better. Get them through their cancer and have them the longest cancer survivors of their category than anybody else in the group, which we do all the time, then that's great. But that's because the patient understands over time. It's not just doing one thing, it's doing a variety of things.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Because I think everybody browbeats sometimes, right? Like, you got to eat more of this, you got to exercise more. And it's like, that becomes a stressor. It's like, life is more complicated. Someone can do all that and die from a gunshot wound walking into a school or a shopping center.
Right.
True.
It's like, so you want to reduce the real risk, but also make sure that we're protecting people from other risks that are kind of sometimes in certain areas might be higher.
Sure.
Wearing your seatbelt, or people texting or drinking and driving. In our state, that's a very, very high. I mean, we have one of the highest drinking and driving rates in the country. So I always tell people, like, it's funny. I always tell them, they always joke, like, make sure you're wearing your seatbelt, make sure you're not texting, make sure because that's what happens here.
Yeah. Which state are you in?
I'm in New Mexico.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, land of enchantment. But there's issues, right? Like, when things are so spread out and this, that, people go drink, they got to drive. Other people, like, in bigger cities, they take an Uber, they go to a bar, or what, or they go take a train, or they walk. But when you have such wonderful space, that also creates transportation and issues where there's a high risk of certain things that people don't think about that occur in smaller rural places than in a big city, like New York, for example.
Yeah.
New York, you can't go anywhere because of the traffic. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So you don't have drunk driving in New York. You can't drive. You're taking a taxi or Uber or a train, where other places that can be a risk.
Exactly. I also want to talk about ibuprofen, because anytime I've gone to the orthopedist in the past, because I have a chronic knee issue, is better. But anyway, they would always encourage taking Motrin or ibuprofen, and I always resisted, because I'm not one to want to take meds, and I found other ways to get better, including your Bosmeric. And I just I've also heard you talk about the dangers. I want my audience to hear it's not a simple drug that you just take and forget about.
That's a great question. One of my soapboxes, I have many, by the way, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate what I do, because I think people deserve to be healthier. They deserve to feel better quality of life, and it's kind of been stripped from them, not knowingly, from convenience and cost, and it's just available, so let's do this. But NSAIDs is a big thing that I focus on in my book. I go into have a whole chapter on that, but we'll just briefly kind of cover the risks and dangers of taking a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. So let me just present my screen here. So, it's called NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and when we think of those are going to be, sorry, I'm not going to make my screen full because then you won't be able to see me. You're talking about Advil, which is ibuprofen, Motrin, which is ibuprofen, Aleve, which is naproxen, Celebrex, which is celecoxib, right? So 1/3 of the population takes these drugs every day. 1/3 of the population. So 100 million Americans are taking this right now. There's 30 different types. Now there actually being more. There's 80 million prescriptions that are written, 30 billion over the counter because they're generic brands. So these are like, these are the trademark brand names that you see on television, but you can go to any kind of Walmart and get a Walprofen. You go to CVS Profen. You go to any kind of, store, Whole Foods Profen. They will just private label the molecule because these are all generics, right? So the challenge that people don't know about is we like to look at facts, because a lot of people think, well, just because something is over the counter, isn't it safe? So let's start off with the NSAIDs. So NSAIDs now, these are all evidence-based, published in orthopedic journals. So it's not alternative medicine. Looking at people who take NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, Motrin, Advil, Celebrex, those kind, and the generics of those. So the data will show it actually accelerates the degeneration of the joint. Okay, so by all these things, so like people are trying to take like glucosamine and chondroitin, and they're getting injections of stem cells in their joints, and they're getting, hyaluronic acid injections, Synvisc injections in their knee, and they're going in and doing all these repair. But the drug itself is actually inhibiting the regeneration of those components. It actually degrades it over time. Within 2 years of someone taking this on a regular basis, just taking it every day, there's actually degeneration that you can actually see on an X-ray. And that's why in the study, it was a 5-year study. And at year 2, they saw the changes so drastic, they had to stop the study. This is orthopedics and multi-center, So like these are people like looking at your knee every day. They're the ones who, you go, oh, I'm having knee pain. And they're the ones who give you the steroid injections or the anti-inflammatories and stuff like this. So it's actually degenerates. It's a negative effect on the cartilage, right? And it accelerates the degeneration of that cartilage in the osteoarthritic joint. So there's no evidence that it shows that it's beneficial, but it accelerates the disease for which they're mostly used and prescribed, because people take for joint pain. Now, if you ask anybody that has chronic arthritic problems, if you take a good history, they'll say, oh, you know what? About 20 years ago, I started taking, I just took 1 ibuprofen a day. And then it ended up taking 2 ibuprofen a day. And then I'm taking, 2 or 3 times a day. And then sometimes I take an ibuprofen and now I'm taking Aleve. Or now I take a Celebrex and an ibuprofen, or, so they're stacking it, thinking like, well, gosh, my inflammation is getting worse. But what's getting worse is the drugs actually degenerating their joint, which is then causing more inflammation because you're getting bone on bone. They're eating the standard American diet, triggering more inflammation on top of that as well, right? And they're gaining weight, which is causing more degeneration and pressure onto the joint, which is well. So we got to get rid of the NSAID. And now common side effects that people have: heartburn, this is dyspepsia, right? So how many people have to take a Tagamet, Zantac, omeprazole, PPI, these proton pump inhibitors? I have heartburn. Well, if they're taking this all the time, they can have that, right? So then they're treating it with another drug. Or constipation issues. Yes, we're eating a standard American diet. We're having 7 to 12 grams of fiber a day. We need to get 30 or more grams minimally a day of fiber. So then that's adding to on the diet is adding more to the constipation. Then they end up taking like laxatives or some kind of Miralax or some kind of thing that actually causes more dysfunction to the microbiome. Headaches, drowsiness, dizziness, fluid retention, tinnitus. How many people have ringing in the ears? But one of the things that people forget, particularly women of childbearing age or are looking at fertility, is delayed ovulation. So these are things that we don't think about. Like, oh, I go to the gym, I exercise, I take my ibuprofen, and I can't get pregnant. Right? So these are certain things that very simply are affecting thousands of people without knowing. But these are just common side effects. No one's going to die from this. Maybe just discomforting. But what we have to learn about is what they call a black box warning. And the black box warning, traditionally on the insert of the drug, doctors used to think that there was a warning, and there is, I'll show you in a second, and that it was just in a black box, okay, and a little bit of a black box. But really what the FDA was insinuating about why they called it black box warning, because they were talking about this black box, not the black box that the warning was in. It was that this is the black box that you can end up with that warning. Okay. So these are serious reactions, not common reactions. They're serious reactions that can put you in the black box. Okay. Now the sad thing, I have put this here: FDA approved drug warning contains FDA approved drug, and the reason being is because the FDA did their job. They said, hey, if you have a serious side effect that can put you into this black box, okay? And there's a variety of drugs that have a variety of side effects. So some of them, like certain chemotherapy drugs, have a long list of them. Okay. And some of them just have like, oh, it can cause this or that. And that's very serious. So we got to kind of monitor and make sure that the patient doesn't have it. The problem is that once a drug has a black box warning, okay, and it's put on the insert of the drug. If you went to, like, I was traveling the other day, went to the airport, and I saw, and I was getting again a bottle of water because you can't drink anything on the plane. Before I knew about the plastic study, by the way, I was like, oh no, I got plastics in my body. Because you can't bring your glass bottle with water in the airport. So I was like, okay, this is stressing me out. But I was at the checkout and I saw these two people behind me, and they just came. They got a little bit of, they sell those little mini packs of ibuprofen, right? They sell 2-pack, right? Someone's having a headache or back pain or whatever. If you're on the feet, you're carrying your luggage all day, so they pop. They're just opening it. But once you open up that little package, or once you twist the cap off the bottle, you've accepted the terms and conditions if your drug has a black box warning. Okay, so there's no liability to the pharmaceutical company. There's no liability to the manufacturer or the retailer. You can't call 1-800-BAD-DRUG that I took it and I had a problem. Now, the issue is all NSAIDs have a black box warning, meaning all ibuprofen, Motrin, Advil, Celebrex, naproxen, all those things have it. But what the black box warning specifically is for NSAIDs is cardiovascular risk. So it can increase thrombolytic events, which is like stroke, MI, which is heart attack and stroke. Okay. It increases. So the more you use it, the higher the risk. And if someone has heart disease risk factors, okay, obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, or elevated cholesterol, now that's most of America on some level, right? That risk goes up even higher, right? So now I'll give you an example. Someone could be plant-based, be vegan, have excellent lipid panel, meaning their cholesterol is really great, take this, have a heart attack. Okay. So this is like, well, wait, I'm not eating the stuff that causes heart attack. No, you're taking a drug that can cause heart attack. Now, GI risk, this is the other thing. So you can get ulcers, bleeding, stomach, intestine perforation may occur at any time during use without warning symptoms. So even for young women, this happens all the time in college, right? They take an ibuprofen, for their menstrual cramps, understandably, and bam, they get a GI bleed. They go to the emergency room, and what does the emergency room doctor say? Well, maybe she was drinking because she's in college. Maybe she was partying, and she got a stomach ulcer, or she was stressed, and that. Not saying, well, maybe she just took the simple Midol or the ibuprofen just that one time a month, not taking it all day, every day, and she has a GI bleed. So it happens, and how many people now have ulcers and stomach ulcers? Aside of the alcohol, the antibiotics, the stress, the other drugs, the aspirin, and the standard American pro-inflammatory diet, now we're just taking something easily over the counter. Now, the challenges with this black box warning is that, in my book, we'll cover all this in detail if those people want a deep dive. But, when we look at all the wars combined, taking out World War II, but everything else from Revolutionary War on up, even to Iraq and Afghanistan, more people died from the GI bleed than died in those wars. More people get hospitalized. Right? So these are like, when you put these numbers in perspective, now this data only goes up until like 2016. So it's even higher now because now we got internet, we got sales, we got online pharmacies and stuff. But this is like crazy when we look at the numbers. And when we look at the independent review, this numbers has actually gone up higher. This is data. This is about 10 years old, 15 years old. But in my book, I talked about this. When we look at lifestyle diseases, right? Heart disease is number one. Okay, actually, number two is different on this now. Number two is COVID, because COVID killed 1.1+ million unfortunate Americans over the last couple of years, and then cancer and stroke. But the number one cause of death. So these are lifestyle. These are things that we call like hey, this is like what we can give a drug to stop. But the number one cause of death is medical errors and side effects of drugs. And of the side effects of drugs, the NSAID class is the largest.
Wow.
Right. So when we're talking about like the stacking effect in my book, and how we talk about, I have a lot of lectures on online, the stacking effects of inflammation and risk. These are stackable things, right? So the goal is like someone can eat a pro-inflammatory diet. We're stressed. We're having all this inflammation, nutritional deficiencies, toxicities, and then we just throw an ibuprofen on top of that, right? So these are the things that you're turning up all these knobs on that stereo again, and you're blowing out your speaker. It's not just one level of frequency. It's everything is just starting to stack, right? Starting to cause more fuzziness, and the frequency is not good sounding, it's distortion, right? So the goal is understanding that we really want to avoid the black box at the end of the day. And again, 1/3 of the population takes it. So if you have the problem now, why they sell so much, just letting you know, is because since the companies do not have liability and 1/3 of the population takes it every day, everybody's in the game to sell it.
Wow.
Right? Everybody has a financial motive. That's why, like, you can go to any retailer and they have their generic form because everybody wants a piece of that 100 million people taking it every day without any liability. I mean, that's the best kind of business you can have. People will take it. Anything happens, no problem. It's on them. They should have read the insert. They accepted the risk. Just like when you open your phone or you open your email, it says you have to accept the terms and condition every time they update the software. You say yes. And it says like, oh, they can spam you. They can sell your data. You can be hacked or breached. You accept that. It can be damaging to your reputation and maybe ruin your credit, but it won't kill you directly. But these drugs can. So we always have to find a natural solution or alternative.
Wow.
Wow, that's incredible. That's crazy. Wow, I didn't know ibuprofen was so dangerous, huh?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's a risk. It's a risk, right? So the idea is like people will say, a lot of patients. I mean, almost everybody will come to my office and they'll say, "I've been taking that for years," and I go, "Well, how you doing?" Well, I got joint pain, this thing. I got to take H2 blocker for my stomach. I got this, I got that. I got ringing in the ears. I got headache. You know, well, how much is it due to that? Well, how much is due to all these other things? So there's a stacking effect. It's not the only cause, but you're just pushing up. Remember, there's a threshold in your body. I call it the levy point in all my patients. In every cell in every part of your body, I always use this levy point because in my book, I use the levy. You know, like remember in New Orleans when Katrina hit, there was a levy, right? And the water goes up and down. And then once that water crosses that threshold, there's a disaster, right? The wall, it breaches and the whole town breaks down or is flooded. Same thing in your body. There's a certain amount of inflammation that is normal wear and tear. We can't be zero inflammation. You need inflammation to know we have pain and fever and temperature and pressure. And it's regulating your organ and your immune system functioning. So there's a certain amount of inflammation that we do want. But when it's too much and we start stacking and we cross it, then that inflammation starts to break down. So we get anything with an itis, itis, this means inflammation. Now we have 200 different itises, right? Dermatitis or skin, conjunctivitis, rhinitis, sinusitis, gingivitis, esophagitis, gastritis, colitis, vaginitis, arthritis, prostatitis, there's 200 of them. So we have to always look at then what is coming and that's triggering that inflammatory response. How do we lower it? How do we increase your immune system functioning for fighting, fixing, and repairing? How do we get, the stress reduction because stress triggers inflammation as well? So there's a variety of things that you can do. It's not just like only take this, but you want to be not taking that, definitely.
That's very, very interesting to know that, I had no idea it was that dangerous, but thank you so much for letting us know. I appreciate that. I did have a question about your family members. Do your family members follow the plant-based things that you do? How's that?
My parents are actually plant-based. Now, interesting thing is there's a little study that we did because they just moved from Maryland recently 2 years ago to Albuquerque. They had some health issues. They're a little bit older. And so just for being closer by, so I don't have to travel all the time to visit them and also to help them go to their appointments and stuff like this, because most people need an advocate for help. As most of you have probably experienced, medicine is not very clear and it's fast and it's kind of like, okay, you get your 7-minute visit and someone who's a senior may need a little, even younger, needs a little bit more time to process or understand what is being told to them. But I moved them and they live in this assisted living facility. It's owned by Montessori, so it's kind of like very progressive. I don't know if you know Montessori schools for children, but it's kind of like Waldorf Montessori, right? And so it's an intergenerational thing. They bring children in. It's really kind of a happy place. They have a lot of activities that keeps people active and all. It's really it's really nice. But they weren't plant-based there. And they came in, they were plant-based before, and they came in, and unfortunately, food services, like everywhere else in America, it's a profit center, right? Just like schools, hospitals, and prisons, they all use the same food service, really. Okay. Gross. And so they were just and I was trying to say, like, what's going on here? And so they were giving them the standard American food that they sell in these facilities. Like if you went to a Marriott and you ate at their dining facility, right? Like, here's your food. Beef, chicken for, blah, 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 right? And it was, it's good in the sense of like, it's not McDonald's, bad that it's not plant-based. And my dad's lipids went up. All their numbers went up. Blood sugar went up, all this other stuff. And then I went in and I said, hey, look, well, they came in. Here's our labs before they came in here. Here it is. And then I said, by law, the law says that if you have a doctor's note, which they did from, their doctors saying that they should be eating plant-based. So then now they get plant-based foods, then now we repeat their tests and everything. So like just even in that's like the crossover study as we talk about, right?
Yeah.
That's how, but that, they're in a controlled environment. They're not going out and eating other things where people say, well, that's confounding your data. It's like, no, you're there you go to your dining hall, you have, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can pick what all you have on the menu. But if you don't have plant-based options, then you're forced to eat, again, dairy and cheese and chicken and eggs and stuff like that. So it's a very interesting thing that, yes, now they are plant-based. They understand it, but I think a lot of things that we have to do is challenge people on how they can enforce or change the systems. There's a great project that you can look up, and it's called what's the name of it? Something meals, Universal Meals.
University.
Oh yeah, universalmeals.com. It's from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which we're a member of. What they did is they worked with the Culinary Institute of America for 3 years, and Mayor Eric Adams of New York, and also Cory Booker in Congress. They are both plant-based. You can see their stories, and you can hear their stories, right? Being African American, having the high predominance of blah blah blah, right? And the economics, and also everybody eats this way. They have heart disease and heart problems, and they changed all their conditions just by changing their diet. And so they were all advocates of like, hey, we need to get to the inner city community and tell them, because their healthcare outcomes are worse because they have less healthcare and access. So they did a pilot study. It's with the Physicians Committee, with the Culinary Institute, and they tried the New York hospital system. New York hospital system is the largest hospital system in the United States because it feeds, you know, there's 5 different boroughs, and they have, you know, hundreds of thousands of patients and different ethnicities. And they came up with working on a plant-based diet system where you're encouraging diversity, meaning, so like everybody gets a seat at the table. So their kind of slogan, where, because, you know, if you're in New York, it's the melting pot. I mean, you got your Italians, you got your Puerto Ricans, you got your Asians, you got your African. I mean, it's like everybody has their own culture coming here. It's like, I want my food, right? It's not just like, here, I'm in New Mexico. Okay, we want like Mexican and Tex-Mex, you know, whatever. You know, it's kind of like, you know, depending on where you live, or, you know, if you're in Kansas, it's going to be this way. If you're in Florida, it's going to be this way, right? So like, but they're the melting pots. So they had to figure out how to make plant-based foods that also are encompassing people's flavors and ethnicities and their foods that they're used to. And so they ended up coming up with, you know, this dietary plan, and it's free. So people go to universalmeals.com. They have hundreds of recipes now that have been, you know, vetted. They actually have a 95% satisfaction rate score of food in the hospital.
Hard. Yeah,
I think amazing. They do. I forget how many, like, you know, 20, 30, 40,000 meals a day. And so when people go to the hospital in New York, their first choice that they get on the menu is plant-based. The chef's choice of the day is plant-based, and then they have an option for a third choice if they don't want it. But the thing is, it's so tasty. They made it so flavorful and tasty, encompassing, again, not just forcing like, here's a bean salad or here's kale and quinoa. Yep. Here's your, you know, here's your local ethnic food that you grew up with. It's just healthier. They love it. So it's an interesting thing is they did so in that study, they showed it's actually cheaper. They saved like 70 cents per meal.
Wow.
On cost. Wow. So now you can go to that website, and it's nonprofit, and you can go take it to your school, you can take it to your hospital, your living center, and you can say, hey, those people will consult with you and help you, like with the food menu, with the vendors and all stuff like that. But there's such a resistance, even with my parents' facility, because they make money on food services.
Terrible.
Like it's like Jamie Oliver trying to change the schools. Remember in the education a long time ago, trying to make it all healthier. And some of them did it, and they did really well. The kids did well. The numbers of grades that got better. That the fights and the ADHD got better. But then the schools were like, "Hey, we're losing our profit center because we make a higher margin on these subsidized animal protein foods." So it's a conflict, but it can be done. So now we know that it can be done. So people, I have people like, "Hey, what is there a place where I can get some?" You know, and the other thing is on those recipes, it also takes out the 8 common allergens. Okay, so those people have like a peanut allergy or soy allergy. Most of my patients don't have a soy allergy, so I add, soy, tofu, tempeh back. Or if they don't have an allergy, I can say, hey, you can add this into your recipe. But it's something that's, these are free programs that people can easily get and have access to that are, and they even have like low cost things, like people who have like less than 5, college students. I mean, I'm living on a budget, or like that. Right. Like, what can you do? So it's not going to be like this fancy. You can get fancy, and they have like breakfast, lunch, dinners, appetizers, everything. But these are things that we should be promoting because it's been proven and it's cost effective. Therefore, there's no more argument.
Yes, can't
definitely
that out there.
Yeah.
I had a question about the best combination of spices to use if somebody has chronic, joint issues.
Yeah, excellent question. We use a combination called Bosmeric. I'll just show you a couple of slides, and then
I'm definitely a fan of it. I use it myself daily. I once heard Dr. Pai say that if if you don't have inflammation, take take the Bosmeric and you'll find out you had inflammation. It really does
You know,
make a
it's funny
difference.
because we have a lot of people who come in and purchase the product who are not patients, right? Because we have a retail store, and other doctors, refer people to come in to buy us because we look at everything in our store has been vetted. We look at the GMPs, we look at the certificate of analysis, and we're always changing products because manufacturing changes, lot changes, the environment changes, access or quality of ingredients that people don't really understand, but we do. And so when they come to our place, a lot of people are like, oh my God, I got to take this because I feel so good. And then we just reminding them, this is safe, it's effective. We're so thankful if we use it, but you need to then make an appointment, or you need to have someone look into why you're having so much inflammation, right? Because like it's we call it it's the magic miracle that people use, but we also want to know, like, well, why are you so dependent on it? It's a safer option. It helps a variety of aspects. It lowers 100 different levels of inflammation in the body, not just one. It has no black box warning, but we still want to look at, well, why this person having itis issues, and that's why then they will say, okay, that's a good idea, let me see, and then they don't have to use as much as time goes on because now we find the source of what else is imbalanced in their body. But one of the things I did write this book as a bestseller in 2016, and actually a patient did this picture for me because I'm a physician here in
I
the
love
United
that.
States that has used these herbs, and they just call me curcumin just because it's like Superman, which is nice. I'm very flattered by that. But it's because I've used it in more patients than any other clinic in the entire United States. Why? It's because we've been using this for 24 years, and we've been following the studies from day one. And every time a study is published, we're able to actually look at even more reasons why we have been using it. But we first start off with turmeric and curcumin, and they're different. Turmeric is the root, and the root contains about 2 to 5% of curcuminoids. But the interesting thing that people don't realize is that there's 3 different curcuminoids. Okay, so a lot of people will say, like, oh, it says curcumin on there, right? And remember, I said 43% now of turmeric and curcumin products sold is a synthetic molecule. It may just be only one of these, or it might be another molecule that they're just claiming or classifying, right? Because it's not a regulated industry. Supplements are not regulated, right? So what we look at is that what we're using is the right form of curcumin, which is we call curcumin C3 complex. That's the one that has the most amount of research and publication. And these 3 type of curcuminoids are actually standardized to a certain ratio. So the false narrative that people will see is they'll say, well, my product says 95% curcuminoids. It doesn't tell you how much of what. Okay, or it just says curcuminoids, right? Or just turmeric extract or curcumin extract. Those ones you got to run from because there's a high risk of it having lead contamination, having synthetic molecules, or just not working at all. But there's 23,000 publications, right, on just the root itself, and using it in food. We've been using it in Asia, right, for 4,000 years. But when we look at Bosmeric now, like we have now 185 clinical studies published, peer reviewed. It's the most researched, most, of the patents. It's the most efficacious, the most safe, studies. And when we look at our competitors are going to be other quote unquote patented forms, right? There's like 5 or 6 other patented forms. They only have about 25 studies all combined. And most of them are what they call white papers, which are just advertorials that are in journals, kind of like an advertisement that you see like in magazines. And so a doctor wrote it, they throw some science in there, but we want to have like a peer-reviewed published study from a university independently, or a hospital or a research center, not funded by, I'm not writing an article, for example, promoting the product. And then every other brand that you see on the market has no study. So when we look at, again, talking about these are some of the ones that are the patented ones that you'll see. Doctors, chiropractors on the internet, you'll see a lot of these names. You can read them here. They're very limited clinical data. Most of them are done in test tubes. Very few actually have any done in a patient. So the biggest issue that we see is that a lot of studies in the last 5 years of these products would say, oh, it's 29 times more absorbable curcumin. And then each product company was like 65 times more. 101 product said 277 times more absorption. But of what? And what they're looking at is in the test tube, they're actually measuring a metabolite. Okay. And of that metabolite, when we actually look at that metabolite has no anti-inflammatory effects. So it's kind of more of nothing is nothing. Wow. But it's something that they can measure. Nobody's going to go and read the study. They're just going to say 270 times more absorbable. You're going to see it on a package. It's going to be inexpensive. You're going to say, wow, this is the better one. That's just fancy marketing, right?
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, we want to look at efficacy. Efficacy is key, and you have to understand, like, are we actually comparing apples and apples? And then when you look at all the products, if you just went to like an Amazon or a Walmart or something, and you just typed in, you'll see all these brands, which is the most of the brands, no data, right? So
Wow.
they're making a claim. So it was like using the data, for example, that's in our studies, that in our patent, the ingredients that are patented that we use, they take that indirectly and say, well, this does this. And I go, no, you can't compare your product to our ingredients if it hasn't been studied or shown to be safe or
Yeah.
efficacious,
Yeah.
or finding out where the manufacturer is, what it is, where's it coming from, is it synthetic or not, does it have any other issues with that? That's the challenge with the supplement industry. And that's why most people who take supplements, they say it doesn't work, which is true. And then other doctors who are conservative say, don't take it because they're dangerous, which on one part is true. But what we want to do is we want to look at, when you have the right training, you have the right manufacturing, you have the right science, then natural medicines is just the extension of plant foods. These are all coming from foods, right? The problem is that we haven't been eating these foods for decades, right? So now we have to look at these components, take it out and give it. Because here's one thing, I'll just be frank. I'll see a lot of plant-based doctors who I am a fan of, who I, as colleagues, we speak on the same stages. We've gone to the same conferences, and I promote their books, and I love their whole approach to plant-based diet. But the problem is, they'll say, eat plant-based, and then what happens when someone has a headache? Take an ibuprofen. I'm disconnected here. I'm like, wait, why aren't we talking about natural? Because they're not trained in natural therapies. So they wanted to say, well, I don't want to recommend anything that doesn't have any data, because they have not been educated on what actually works or doesn't work. But again,
Yeah.
source of lead in turmeric, synthetic. And then here's a study that came out that was done by University of Kentucky, which is very interesting, is that they took the 5 top manufacturers of curcumin. These are the 5 biggest companies that have like hundreds of sub companies, right? So like, if you go, I showed you those Amazon, all those names, if you just Googled like turmeric and curcumin. So 5 major suppliers, like these are the biggest ones, right? And they just sell it to all the different companies, and they label their product. They looked at their curcuminoids. They actually did it in vivo and in vitro, in the cell culture and in the animal model, and it showed that the 4 out of the 5 had no anti-inflammatory effects, very little, right? So it has some, but they're not created equal.
Yeah.
So even though they said 95% curcumin, all of them were 95% standardized, it had very little efficacy. And the only one that did show highest in all the studies there was the one that we used in Bosmeric. So that's the reason why when you take and go, oh, it works, and if I try something else, it seems the same, it's not. All right. You got to be careful of turmeric oils. That's something that's being trendy now because of, again, and actually the data shows it increased morbidity, mortality, GI bleeding, and death, which is not good. And you always want to avoid nanoparticles. Nanoparticles killed the animals in the study. So if you see anything that says nano, you just want to run away from it when it comes to curcumin. Okay.
Yeah.
We have a bilayered tablet, which means that when you look at manufacturing, if you put, we have boswellia, we have ginger, we have curcumin, and we have bioprine. If you put ginger or proteolytic enzymes, nattokinase, bromelain, these are things that you'll see in any kind of joint formula. If you put it in a capsule with other ingredients, it will degrade the other ingredients as it sits in the capsule, and then the potency will decrease over time. So once you understand pharmacology and the manufacturing aspect, we are making the natural agent like a drug, where it's 100% at the time when you take it, whenever you take it, even a year after you take it, you put it in your mouth, it has 100% of those ingredients at the time that you take it. But if you have it in a capsule, you might have only 10% of that potency of the ingredient because it's degrading. So there's levels of like why products don't work in the market, because people are not looking at efficacy, they're just looking at selling more product. So we have it also so that it's a sustained release. So even if you use the right form of curcumin, this is the blood studies. And then when they add the black pepper, it increases. That's why we always put bioprine or the black pepper extract. But what happens is it goes up and it goes down. So in the studies, when people were using it for cancer or chronic disease, you were seeing that they were taking it multiple times a day, super, super high doses, right? 3 grams, 6 grams, 12 grams a day. No toxicity. Kind of have yellow poop at the end of the day. But we want to look at is that when we sustain release it, it has a 20-minute onset of action. So you can take it like a fast tab. Boom, within 20 minutes, your pain is going down, headache is going down, back pain. But more importantly, we have it lasting over 8 hours. So you took it in the morning, took it in the evening, you're pretty much getting most broad day coverage of lowering inflammation more than any other supplement. And for those people who have chronic issues like really bad rheumatoid or cancer, we have it take them 3 times a day, so they have 24 hours of the relief. Curcumin lowers 100 different mechanisms of inflammation, But one thing that people need to understand about natural therapies is that they're not only just suppressors, they also turn on certain molecules. They turn on certain genes. So drugs always turn off, but we actually upregulate. So it's upregulating 100, 202 mRNA transcripts and downregulating 505. What it means is that it's helping your gene express. It turns on anti-cancer genes and turns off cancer-promoting genes. This is why people who eat this food, turmeric in their diet, have lower overall health problems, right? Allied with all the other, like all the plant foods, by the way, will have certain of these effects, right? Some of them will have more than others in separate areas. But we have to understand when we get plant medicines, what we're looking at is it's a derivation of getting it from a plant food. But a lot of doctors are so like, you must eat plants or anti-inflammatory, but then take a drug, which is always like the weird thing, right? And these are like drugs that we give for cancer, and here's your Celebrex. And so this also targets all these inflammatory cytokines, enzymes, protein kinases. This is all the research will show how that works. And that's why it's a kind of a general. I always talk about when we give natural therapies. In my book, I talk about when you have a fire in your kitchen, the best way to put out the fire in any building is by the sprinkler system effect. You just turn on the sprinklers in the roof, and it just kind of lightly calms the inflammation down, but it doesn't destroy the building. But what happens is a lot of people bring the fire engine truck when we have a kitchen fire, and they use the water, and it knocks out the fire. Don't get me wrong, but then anywhere the hose goes a little bit here or there that doesn't have the fire, then it starts destroying it because it's too strong. So that's the side effect of drugs. Drugs work very well. There's not that they don't work, is that it's a double-edged sword, right? The benefit and the risk sometimes are not so clear. Sometimes the risk can be higher than some of the benefits. The second ingredient we use is boswellia. Boswellia is frankincense. I was one of the first people, although we use this in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, when we put this together, there was an explosion in 2016 of people trying to copy this because it kind of brought up this whole idea, which people totally forgot. Frankincense, myrrh, and gold, where that comes from, like the Magi brought to baby Jesus, right? And so when they say, well, the men from from this area, they don't really talk about where or who, right? And anyways, but this is the Ayurvedic medicine, right? Actually, frankincense is boswellia, myrrh is myrrh, and the gold, in fact, what we're looking at is it may not have been actually physical gold, it might have been turmeric, because turmeric at that time during the spice trade was actually traded more expensively than gold. So there's a kind of a very interesting historical aspect of the spices and how much they used to be charged for. It's very expensive. That's why people like Columbus and all these people were traveling around trying to search for spices. It wasn't like they were looking for other worlds. They were looking at other places that they can get some of these foods and medicines. Again, boswellia is not standardized. You want to avoid the essential oils. So a lot of people use like boswellia oil, but boswellia oil is a different part of the plant than the gum resin that we take internally. So we never want people to take boswellia oil internally. They can take a boswellia essential oil and put it topically, put it in a rub. That's fine, but you never want to take it internally. A lot of people say, oh, they take this data for internal stuff and then they apply it for a topical. You can't do that, okay? The other thing is that all the ingredients that we use is non-irradiated. That's an important thing because everything after 9/11 that comes into the United States has to be irradiated as a biohazard. Okay, so we have to go through all this extra work and effort and cost. That's why people always say cost more. It's because we have to ensure that it goes through all these different levels of testing through customs to the federal government because we don't allow the product to be irradiated. It's kind of like when you microwave your food too much. Every time a product comes in that's an herb, they actually put it on the machine that radiates it just as much as you would sterilize surgical equipment. They don't change it. They just put it like, it's kind of like going through the airport. Everything goes through the scanner, right? Good or bad, like your computer, your this or that, everything gets the same kind of amount of dosing. But when they're sterilizing it, it actually decreases the efficacy of the ingredient because these are plant compounds, right? So they're very sensitive to those kind of things. So you got to be careful of that. We actually have 3 different parts of frankincense, boswellic acids, AKBBA, and something called polysol, which is the newer form, which has been patented, that provides that fast-acting 20-minute absorption, okay? All the ingredients have GRAS status. All of them have data on studies of safety and efficacy, and that's why we use the boswell on PS. Ginger, as you know, is a wonderful food. There's almost 6,000 studies on that. Everybody has eaten ginger somewhere in their life. But what we look at is if it just says ginger powder, ginger is a great thing to take as a food. Don't get me wrong. Eating ginger, juicing ginger, making it, chopping it up, putting it in your food, salsa and Thai food, Indian food, love it. Eat ginger every day. Good for as gastroprotective, helps with digestion. So we teach this all in our office. But when it's in supplements, if it just says ginger powder, then you better just eat it. Most of the ginger is irradiated. And again, you want to make sure that it is without any kind of pesticides or herbicides because it's a root, it's a rhizome, right? So all the rhizomes like turmeric and ginger heavily sprayed with pesticides. So a lot of people, if you go to the store, they just like buy some ginger. It's like I'll only buy it organic. If I get in a jar, even if it's chopped, I'm only getting it organic. Otherwise, we're just hyper concentrating because we're using it all the time. But again, more importantly, if you put ginger, bromelain, nattokinase, or any of the other kind of proteolytic enzymes in a capsule with any other ingredient, it will degrade that. And that's why we have ours in that unique bilayered sustained release. We actually standardize ours to the 20% gingerols, which is the highest available of that content worldwide. You might see some products having up to 5% gingerol. So ours is already 4 times the highest available. And it has, ours are pesticide-free, non-irradiated. It does have a gastroprotective effect. So a lot of people think that when they take ginger, it's kind of pungent. It's a little bit spicy, right? But it actually protects the stomach. It's actually a gastroprotective. It actually calms the inflammation. That's why we give it for nausea and vomiting in pregnant patients. FDA has approved that only food that women take for nausea and vomiting during chemotherapy and pregnancy is ginger. So we always have people drink ginger tea and make chew ginger candies and stuff like that. Fantastic. So even though it has a little bit of a spice, it actually people think, oh, is it going to cause ulcer in my stomach? Actually, no. It's actually gastroprotective. It actually protects the stomach lining. And then the black pepper. Black pepper is almost on every single table, right? In every restaurant or in every home. We use it as a spice, but what people don't realize is that black pepper has 2 roles. Black pepper is an anti-inflammatory itself, and black pepper also helps absorb other compounds. Okay, so when we put these in Ayurveda, which we've been doing for 4,000 years, they put the black pepper in a product because it helps the absorption. Now, there's one thing called piperine, like the curcuminoids, and how that's been extracted has been patented. Okay, now if you just see generic 95% piperine and it doesn't say bioprine, you can have a different outcome. Right. So it's just like the same thing that people say, oh, doesn't it look the same? It's like, no, that if they're not actually seeing that, because when they patent it, they have a specific way of how they actually extract it. So there's data saying that now the generic black pepper compounds don't have really any anti-inflammatory or enhancing absorption effect. They just want to buy a cheaper ingredient. Black pepper does not cause health problems. Okay. Unless you have an allergy. Some people, when we do our testing, will have a sensitivity to black pepper. But a lot of companies you'll see this on the internet, particularly in the alternative news areas. They'll say like, oh my God, pepper can cause a problem. But like the government's not taking it off your table. I mean, people are having peppercorn salmon tonight, or putting fresh pepper on their salad. Someone's going to come tonight, and the restaurant is crack, 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 crack. No, it's just that they don't want to add another ingredient, so it makes their products cheaper. They have a higher margin, and then they want to kind of say, well, don't take this. You're not going to get the absorption of your other ingredients. Okay, so we use bioprine again, and it increases the other ingredients 30% up to 2,000% in the curcumin, 30% of the other ingredients. Okay, it's non-irradiated, it's pesticide-free. We put it all together at the clinical doses in a bilayered sustained release caplet. So this is where we're like integrative medicine is fantastic because we're using, ancient wisdom and modern technology. And we're not trying to cheat the system. We're trying to look at like, how do we replace something like an ibuprofen, a Motrin, or Advil, or Celebrex without the side effects? But also, how can we have what we call side benefits, right? How do we lower? Say again?
I can't wait to try it. I think it looks like it's pretty
interesting. I love it.
It's fantastic. Now it's what we also call synergy. So when we did studies, why we put these together, it's not that, oh my God, they're so good, but they're also so good together, right? So 1 + 1 is 3. When we look at synergy of nutrients, a lot of people are like, well, I just take curcumin by itself, even the right kind, or I just take ginger by itself. And even though they have a good potency, it has benefits. But when you look at understanding formulation and pharmacology, most indigenous medicines like Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, we use what they call formulae. And that formulae is about balancing, synergizing, making it stronger, but also balancing potential side effects and balancing and limiting tolerability. So that's why people can take Bosmeric for long, long periods of time. Well, what happens like when you take some of these other drugs, like an ibuprofen, since it's only blocking one pathway and has nothing else to balance it, over time, it wears off. People are like, well, it used to work really well. Now it doesn't work as well. Right? So they start adding more. So that's one thing that we have. Again, the synthetic free, nanoparticle free, GMO free, gluten free, soy free, non-irradiated, etc. And we've done so well, which is always flattery, by the way. I being copied is always a good thing. There's companies like you see here, like you can go on Google and you can type in, you know, our trademark name, and a company will steal it, put it on their SEO. People will click on it thinking they're getting Bosmeric, and they'll take them to another product. Or there's even what they call counterfeit products now that are being sold. Right. So
Wow.
this is a big product problem, but this is how we use natural medicines. Now, it's not to say that we don't want to have people eat plant-based, and we don't want to, you know, look at everything else. But here's the interesting thing: is when we go plant-based, people can have still food sensitivities that are plants.
Yeah.
So one of the areas that, you know, we focus on, I'll just put my information while I'm talking here, is that we look at. So when people transition, you know, some people will say, well, how do you get people to Dr. Pai, how do you get people to eat more plant-based? The first thing that we do is we look at which foods, of all foods, plant, animal, vegetable, grain, legume, seeds, and nuts, cause inflammation from an immune perspective. Sensitivities. You read my story, you'll learn about my issues and what drove me to be like so interested in inflammation in foods, because it's a huge issue. But when we look at that, how I transition someone first, because that's the biggest challenge. Like, how are you going to make someone change their diet when they're been eating this way for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years? One way is that you want to find what is triggering their inflammation the most first. And some of those are going to be animal proteins, definitely. But some of them, from an immune perspective, from a sensitivity perspective, is going to be a plant food. So if I can find out, like maybe you have a sensitivity to potato or tomato or a blueberry, then I'm going to prevent you from what most people do is like, well, I heard blueberries are good for your mental health and your cognition and preventing you from getting dementia and Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to put blueberries in my smoothie every day. Right. And then they'll do something that if we tested them, they have a positive result. They test it, they take it, and they might feel like, I don't feel good. I have, you know, my gut, my this, my that. We want to have it when they start changing their diet, immediately their inflammation drops down. Then they're already one step in the game, right? They're already like, wow, yeah, this is how strong even a plant food, if I have a sensitivity, can cause inflammation in my body. Now that I know it and my pain and my itis conditions are better, now we go further. Okay, now let's start off with dairy. These are the dairy substitutes that you can use. Now start off with eggs. You know, like, so we take people one step at a time, because when it's a lifestyle change, they have to feel something. So we give people the immediate result that gives us the longest compliance. So it's not just like tomorrow you got to go completely plant-based. For certain patients, definitely cancer patients, patients that are flaring and autoimmune, that are bleeding in the colon, we got to change it overnight because we got to stop it immediately. And those people are more encouraged to do that because they get relief immediately. But for everybody else, it's a slow transition, but you give them those wins, because once they realize, even taking a Bosmeric, this is important. If they take a Bosmeric and they get better, which most people say like, oh my God, my pain is better, then that's the power of plant medicines. What about plant food, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner? These type of, you know, eating just anti-inflammatory foods. And that's what helps people the most, is that once they understand that, we check their microbiome, we check their nutritional deficiencies, toxicities. So it's not just, you know, only just the diet, but the diet's the foundation. You got to build your house correctly. Everybody wants to put shinies, you know, solar panels and, you know, all this kind of special paint and stuff, but you got to build it correctly. But we still have to understand that if you understand science in your body also reserves the right to say, I don't like this, or I don't like that. It disagrees with me. Even though it's good to taste and we love it, it might be actually contributing to some of our problems. So we have to dig deeper, because a lot of plant-based doctors sometimes will be like, oh, just eat more plant-based foods. Well, I got a headache. I got menstrual cramps. I got colitis still. Well, just eat more plant-based foods. Like you can't just do the same thing. You have to then look at, well, what in that plant-based diet could be potentially triggering that person's individual issues, and then change that and modify it, and then also reintroduce that food back. There's ways to retrain your body. So it's not just avoidance, it's actually building tolerance. It's actually fixing microbiome dysfunctions. It's actually fixing nutritional deficiencies. Even when we do the nutrition testing with our patients, it will tell us not only how much you need, it tells you what foods you should be eating more of. Which for most of my patients is fantastic, because it's like, I can just eat more of these and I get this. Yeah, you don't have to take pills. Supplements are supplementing the diet, not replacing the diet. I offer the supplements when it's so deficient or it's harder for them to get, or they have a sensitivity to a lot of these foods. I still need to get that level up to lower the inflammation, keep their immune system strong.
Wow.
So these are the aspects that when we look at individualizing medicine is different. Like that's where we do in our specialty in integrative medicine more than most functional doctors only, or natural holistic doctors. We know, but this is just years of experience understanding that subtlety of the art and science of medicine.
I have an appointment at 1:30, but I'm wondering, would you be willing to do a part two, because we didn't?
Sure.
we didn't have time for the other questions.
Sure.
I just it's
It's
so
a lot of
awesome.
information, you know.
Yeah, it's
This is why when we
and-
have our when we're doing our we're gonna do our pod, you know, when we start our podcast, because there's so much information to talk about
there
everything.
is there
And
is
it's not always, you know, it's trying to be fair. It's trying to understand, like, you know, people are trying to do the best, but we get sucked in because the rest of the world is all about marketing on all sides, but,
exactly.
you know, on the
Yeah.
plant-based side, on the supplement
Oh,
side, on the
always, yeah,
pharmaceutical
yeah.
side, on the insurance side, and we want to, like, some of it's good. We need some of these things. Definitely, we use it all the time. I'm not anti-pharma. I'm just anti-side effect. How we practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And but sometimes you get side effects of on, you know, like it's again, it's like the politics. You really gotta be like negotiating and bringing together so we actually can move and pass a bill in the House to create better life for America. Right now, there's so
Right.
much division in all these aspects of health that then people get stuck in their own bubble, but they're also sometimes stuck in their own bubble for the wrong reasons, and they never get to where they want to go.
Yeah.
So true.
Our goal is to help them do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I'll email you both during
Okay.
the week, and maybe we can set a time maybe next weekend if you're free or
Sure. That'll be fine.
okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that sounds good.
Appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.